here's something I never turned to before, never really read. I'm not going to read the whole thing, or should I? Subchapter F, Consumer Interest Information in Complaint Procedures. Section 1001.252, General Rules Regarding Complaint Investigation and Disposition. A. The board shall adopt rules that permit the board to receive and investigate a confidential complaint against a license holder or other person who may have violated this chapter. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's just what I turned to. Under Title 6 of the Texas Occupations Code from 2005, engineering, etc. Apparently, in 2005, there were numerous changes to the laws of Texas, including the Occupations Code. September 1st, 2005. There was also another change. Under Financial and Legal Services, Title 5, Section 954.001, Exception to Practice of Law. Practice of law does not include acts relating to the lease, purchase, sale, or transfer of a mineral or mining interest in real property. And that's what this is about, isn't it? I'm concerned that what happened is that when I interviewed over the phone with a law firm, while I was still working a job at another law firm in another state, that somebody got it in their mind that they were going to engage in some very high risk activities regarding transfers of real property, of that which is not actually real property. And that the whole situation was that there was this whole complex scheme, and people believed they were doing it for whatever the higher good was. And it was a bunch of lawyers. They had their interest. And they used other people as their pawns, including me. And what happened is there were minors that were bonded to me, and that I and my movements were supposed to aid and abet the illegal conveyance of misrepresentations of real property that were in fact actual human beings. I am not a slave broker, and I don't work for any slave brokers, especially any minors being brokered as somebody else's property. Now, in the United States, slavery, as well as peonage, which legally qualifies as a form of slavery under the law, are violations of the 13th Amendment. Trafficking, including acts of trafficking connected to forced labor or sex, is against the law, and it is a violation of the 13th Amendment. Now, if there was something about that kind of arrangement, whereas I understand it, I, as an adult woman, was supposed to engage in some form of confirmation of a contract arrangement with somebody else who was an adult man, and that both of us were in a situation where we were representatives of people who had interest at stake, including interest connected to hopes associated with a long-term effort. Somebody should have talked to us both directly and in person and assured that we consented and that we had everything we needed to do it safely and legally. I've spent 15 years with somebody else thinking they were entitled to use me as their mineral interest and to lease me out as they like. And I think that they justified this because on some level there was some higher good. that charity could be sacrificed because there were a lot of very talented and capable young people who were at stake. And that, this whole take a hit now for a long term gain, well, it depends on who you're hitting and for what reason. I never, ever, ever would have agreed to do this. And the thing is, it didn't need to be done this way. Yes, I did. I specifically and strategically contacted my former employer to request the letter I did at the time I did because I heard you. I heard what you were setting up when I tried to get a replacement birth certificate. I heard you. You murdered my mother. I believe you were aiming at me. It hit my mother. You murdered my mother. And I know how. So we're in a very difficult situation in this regard because it was never legal for anybody, including people that purported themselves to be attorneys licensed to practice law of any sort, to dispossess me of my constitutional rights to due process because you had illegally bonded me as real property. And that's really all there is to say. Anybody else you bonded as real property in or through me was a constitutional violation. Anybody else with whom I was involved in any manner, way, shape, or form that was bonded as real property of anybody else, including in a manner that allowed other people to be bonded to him as real property, well, that was unconstitutional as well. You're not allowed to do that. And even if you think, because you're a fancy lawyer, and you can engage in some sort of underhanded derivative process where that real property is just the mineral interest associated with the tangible property that is acquired in the course of exploiting the intangible property that is acquired in the course of the conveyance, which is part of the compliance with the contract terms set up in the course of bonding you as property. Well, all of that's unconstitutional. And even if you find a bunch of fancy ways to try to hide it in a whole bunch of other codes, so that by the time you actually get to the 13th Amendment, we're all supposed to be too subordinated, bonded to be able to even talk about it ourselves, it's still unconstitutional. It's been unconstitutional for the last 15 years. Everything you did with it for the last 15 years was unconstitutional. Everything you promised other people you would do with it for the last 15 years was unconstitutional. Everybody you tried to market make, everybody you tried to promote, everybody you tried to behaviorally, scientifically condition, all of them had their 13th Amendments violated. And the burden of proof, especially because you decided to do this here in Texas, is on all of you with your fancy little piece of paper that says you got a license to practice law. Are we clear now? Do you understand the charges? All of the other kettle rustling, all of the other paperwork, all of the friends that liked the show, everybody sitting around the rodeo ring, watching them bring out that woman or that man and electronically torture them while somebody else puts on a number and tries to get what? A broker's fee? Legal fees? A wage? Workers' comp insurance? All of that was unconstitutional. It's very big. It's very big because in the meantime, with all of that unconstitutional activity that you did, there's all this other stuff you tried to justify somehow being legitimate. That included trafficking children. 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 That included trafficking children in other countries. That included importing children from other countries to traffic. That included not being able to successfully get the buy-in of at least one particularly stubborn child you've been trafficking for 35, if not 45 fucking years. Is that what this case is about? Yeah, it's absolutely what this fucking case is about. And it's international in scope, you know? And the problem is that wherever you ended up trying to flip out my primary identification documents at whatever time you intersected with it, to whatever country, and for that time frame I'm supposed to believe that's how I'm characterized, guess what? You're trafficking that person too. And it is illegal to do what you're trying to do. Slavery is obsolete. It's illegal. You can't do it. You will not get away with it one way or another. Doesn't matter if she's 13. It doesn't matter if she's 43. It's just not going to happen. So I'm going to wake up whenever I wake up after this, and we'll get started. I think maybe you're the one that needs education. Apparently, all of those deals you brokered, and all of those people you socialized with, and all of those networks that you tapped into, somehow you missed some very, very remedial education. You were never, ever fucking allowed to do this. Every fucking day, you need to be reminded you are not allowed to fucking do this. And everything you do is just an excuse to try to cover your ass. You did not succeed. It's about time you own up to it. It's about time you act like a fucking grown-up and take some responsibility.